Right, welcome everyone. This is now session 6. So today we're going to continue looking at the little practice exercise that we made a start on last week, which is the little two-storey building. And we initially I sort of talked about, or just gave you a refresher on how to create a terrain in Revit. Now, just before we continue with that, thank you everyone thank you to those who promptly sent me your materials library. Okay, so thank you to those students. There are still many students that still haven't sent me by email that materials library. Okay, so I guess probably mostly, well, there's quite a few external students that haven't yet emailed me that file. I do want to see it because I just want to sort of make sure that you are on track and that you're keeping up with the exercises, because that particular library will be required for your assessment task. So it is important that you do complete that one. Now, just I guess a bit of a roadmap, I guess, as to where we're going from here. We are here, 5th of September. So we're going to continue, as I say, with the pavilion exercise that we started last week. So that we'll be looking at that for this week and next week, and possibly part of the week after. And just to sort of let you know, or just to draw your attention to the fact that we'll actually be starting the first assessment task on about the 19th of September, so 3 weeks from now, and that will carry through. So when's that one due? That's due October 18th. So you've got a few weeks on that one. Now it does. I guess the due date does go through the holidays. So I guess it's up to you. I'm not going to, it's up to you. If you want to work on it during the holidays, that's fine. I don't like doing that sort of thing, but I guess you've got the extra time there. It's probably a good idea to sort of get stuck into it and get it done, submit it on time. Don't stress about it. Give yourself plenty of time to sort of complete it. It is quite a large assessment task. There is a fair bit to do. So just maybe sort of get into it sooner rather than later. All right, so beyond that, once the assessment task is out of the way, we then switch to have a look at the animation aspect of the unit, which ironically is I guess the animation is really the core of it. That's the whole unit basically, but we have to have something to animate. So hence the first assessment task. Okay, so that's the next few weeks. So if you can if you haven't already downloaded, can you download the Revit file that we had a look at last week, which is at the end of topic 2, Revit materials, which is this one here. Okay, so if you weren't here last week, can you just quickly download that one? And then open up Revit and load it into Revit. So I guess this exercise is designed to prepare you for the assessment task. So I'm sort of going to try and go through as many aspects of the assessment task as I can on a smaller scale, just to give you an idea of the process. So the file itself, as I say, looks like this in the site plan anyway. Last week I gave you a refresher on how to create a terrain if you need to create one. Okay. Now the thing is that we did create a separate terrain and then we deleted it, but in the 3D view, you might only be able to see a box like that. So just check your 3D view. Okay, so that's a section box. Remember, we put a section box around it just to sort of give the illusion of of being solid. Now, in your 3D view, if you can only see the section box and nothing else, to actually switch the section box off, you actually go to the view properties here, and you've got a setting here called section box, oddly enough, with a tick in it. So if you untick that, then everything comes back. So the section box was around that second terrain that we created. Okay, so if you are working with section boxes, it's a view setting. Okay, and I guess the thing is that if you are working with section boxes, you don't have to go to modify, or you don't have to select an object and then click section box up here, or selection box. You can go directly to the view properties and tick section box, and it will automatically put a section box around the current model. Okay. And the section box itself, yes, you can just use these controls to actually just draw it in like so. So they are quite useful for presentation. All right. So we'll move on. Now, last week, does anyone remember how what I spoke about with regard to adding roads and pathways on a terrain? Do you remember what I spoke about, or the tool that we used for that? One of the tools. Subregion. So yeah. So essentially, we're working from the Massing and Site tab, and I demonstrated the ability of using a subregion to actually replicate or to indicate a road or a path or a trail or some sort of separate area that follows the contours of the terrain itself. And a subregion can be assigned a material depending on what it is or what it's intended to be. So that's good in the fact that it follows the terrain, but quite often with roads and pathing and driveways, they need to be flat. Okay. So what I'm going to show you next is a way to create those objects as flat or completely horizontal surfaces, and at the same time they are solid and they have a thickness. So working on the massing and site tab here using these tools, because essentially this is what we're doing now. This is what we're doing in the first part of the process, is actually developing the site. So that's sort of step one. Step two would then be assigning materials to all aspects of the model, including the site components. Step three would then be maybe creating some perspective views. And step four might be looking at doing some quick renders and sort of looking at the lighting, for instance. So that's the sort of general process. Now, what I'll get you to do is I'm just going to, I guess, demonstrate how we actually put in roads and paths, which you will be required to do in the assessment task. Now, note this object underneath the building. Okay, if you select it, it's actually known as a pad. Okay, and if you actually select it and you do a double H and hide it, and then just render or just shade your model, you can see that the pad itself, when it's hidden, you can actually see that it's made an impression in the terrain itself. And that's exactly what pads do, what a pad does. And a pad is designed to go underneath the building, and essentially what it does is it cuts the terrain. So maybe on a sloping site, it would assist you in actually cutting the terrain, so a volume of the earth out of the terrain to accommodate the building itself. So cut and fill. And the pad itself, or the pad tool, is quite useful for other purposes, such as roads and paths, because it cuts the terrain, cuts through the terrain. So what I'm going to get you to do, I'll just reverse this, just reset the hide isolate. Now this particular object here obviously is a pad, and it belongs to a pad family, and of course pads themselves can have multiple types, so you can create multiple types. So what I'm sort of aiming at is maybe duplicate this one and create a pad that you call roadway, a pad type, create a pad type, duplicate it again and create a pad type that you could call driveway and path, for instance. And there's lots of things you can do with the pad itself because it's like a pseudo floor. They're really, really useful in topography or in site work. So let's see how this works. So if you open up your site view, and what I'll get you to do is actually just select the roof itself. Just click on the roof and do a hide in view by category. Should hold for a moment. Let's just do a temporary hide by category. Okay. So again, select the roof. Go down to the glasses at the bottom here on the view controls and do a hide category. It's often better to sort of do temporary hiding and isolating when you're working in Revit views, unless you actually specifically want to turn something off permanently. Okay, so it's much easier to do a temporary hide and then just recover it with a hide reverse. What I'll also get you to do is select the stairs and hide them by category, but just a temporary hide. Now the shortcut for temporary hide is HC. Okay, so HC will do a temporary hide by category. Now if you issue the shortcut HR, it brings everything back. Okay, so select HC hide category, select HC hide category, and I'll also get you to select the railings, the stair railings, and hide by category as well. Okay, so we're just getting things out of the way so that we can actually draw in our road and our driveway and our pathing, for instance. Okay, so if you can zoom in fairly close to the building itself, we're actually going to work in this area here. So we're actually going to place a driveway, a path and a driveway here, and out beyond the driveway we're actually going to put a roadway towards the edge of the topography. So what I'll get you to do is, can you select the original pad here and open up its type properties and make a copy of it and call this one driveway and path or paths. Now the thing is that you can go into its structure here and you can actually then set the thickness and also assign a material. So I guess probably now would be a good time to assign a material, something that would be appropriate for a driveway slash path around the building itself. So it could be concrete, it could be maybe some sort of paving brick, which is the more common. There's probably not a lot of choices there, but I guess if you can just quickly just sort of find something and assign it. I'm just going to just do a search for paving. So again, I've found one called brick pavers. I mean, you can please yourself. I'm going to use that one here. That's already in the project. In my project it is. It's probably not in yours. If you need to if you want to use it, you're going to have to add it to the project first. So brick pavers, I'll leave the thickness at 300 and click OK. So that's now set up the material, new pad type, and click OK. Now what it's done is it's actually changed the original pad here to my new pad called driveway and path. But what I'm going to do is actually change that back to what it was, which is pad 1, because it had a concrete material assigned to it. And if you can appreciate that once you start developing these pad types, when you create all your different pads all over the place, you can then, depending on what it needs, what it's going to be, you just choose a pad type with an appropriate material. So it's, you know, it's quite adaptable, really. So is everyone okay with that so far? No, this is a bit like a cooking show. This is one I prepared earlier. Okay. I can go through that later if you like, but I've actually added a model surface pattern to this one. And I guess, so I wouldn't worry about that too much for the moment. I think it's more about assigning a material. So, yeah, I can go through this later, but I'll come back to this. Now, question? If you were creating a pad from scratch and not duplicating one, is there a tool for that, to create that pad? Initially? Yeah. All Revit projects have a pad type. They have one pad type called pad 1. So that's your starting point. So is that a component or is there a tool? No, it's a system family. So it's like walls and roofs and ceilings. They are in the project, but you can't actually generate them as, you can't create them as a component outside the project. They exist. They're part of the project. So things like pads and walls and ceilings and roofs. I mean, you would at least get one of them in every project, and then you actually just duplicate them and create your own types from there. So if I wanted to create a pad, how would I go about doing that if I wasn't using one and just duplicating it? Is it just well, the thing is that to actually use the pad in a project, you have to have one there already. So every project does have one. It's not something it's a situation where if you're working in a Revit project, the situation is you wouldn't not have a pad. There would be at least one pad type there, and it's not possible to not have one, if that makes sense. And I say, just having one, you can then create others from that. Yeah. And as far as detailing the boundaries, you're going to go through that. Yeah, I mean, once the pad type is created, we then go through a process of sketching the outline of the pad to create it. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah, that's what we're going to do next. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so step 1 is to create the pad types, and then step 2 is to actually physically draw them. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'll just swap this one back to pad 1. Now, in creating our new pad type, we go back to the Massing and Site tab, and to add the pad or create the pad, we use the Building Pad button here, or tool, and over in the Type selector we choose the pad type, so we choose the new one we've just created. And we're actually in sketch mode now, so we actually have to now draw the outline of our pad. So I'm just going to do it with the line tool, and I'm going to connect to the corner of the existing pad, move across. Now this doesn't have to be all that accurate, but I will give you some dimensions for it. So I'm going to stop there and just draw downwards and across. So we're just getting the shape at the moment. Okay, and stop. So that's roughly the shape. Now, what I'll do is I'll just put some dimensions against this. So what I'm proposing is that I guess the distance from the building to this line here, we'll make that 5.2 metres, and the width of the driveway here, we'll make that 3.8 metres. Okay, so the other dimensions are not really important, so just those two basically. So. But when you are creating a pad, for instance, it is important that the sketch is closed, otherwise it won't work. So it's just like, you know, drawing up a floor or a roof or a ceiling or an eave. Please don't spend too much time on getting this exact. I mean, just, you know, 5.2 and 3.8 is all I'm looking for there. Once you've actually sketched this, you can then click Finish up here, and that will create the pad. Now, yes, the material that I've selected is brick paving, and I've actually, before I've come to class today, I've actually gone in and actually assigned a surface pattern to it, which it's not a difficult thing, but it's just, I guess it's just a matter of, with surface patterns, this is a model surface pattern. So I had to go through a process of just, you know, choosing one and then, you know, adjusting the scale so it looks almost correct. And this is not going to affect rendering. It's really only just presentation like this in a plan view or a 3D view. So what we'll do next is we'll create another. So if you click Building Pad up here, and if you click with the driveway and path pad here in the type selector, it doesn't really matter which one you choose at this stage. Click Edit Type, and just make a duplicate of this one and call it roadway. And then go into its structure and then just assign a suitable material for a road or roads. If you do a search for bitumen, you will get a couple of options down here in the AEC library. There's asphalt bitumen, which is probably a good choice. So you can add that one to the project and select that one. What you might also like to do perhaps is just use render appearance, tick render appearance, just so that the shaded colour of the road is dark. And click OK. And OK. So that's our second new pad. And again, we're now sketching out, we're going to actually draw a couple of roads, or a road going past our property, going down on the eastern side and then returning along the southern side of the property. So again, it's a matter of actually sketching. So if you actually use the sketch tools, and I'm just going to use the line tool here. I'm going to attach to the corner of.
So are you using sub-region
now? No, this is pads. This is we're using pads now. Yeah, no sub-regions. This is all pad. Okay. So yeah, creating the pad boundary. Yeah, sub-regions can be used in certain situations, but I think this is probably a better option, using a series of pads for things like paths and roadways. So the roadway itself, when you move to the right here, can you just type in 4500 as the thickness of the road, which will just give you a bit of topography just to the right of that. So it just sits inside the topography. And then just take it down towards the southern boundary and stop just short of the southern boundary, and then move across to the left. Stop just inside the western side and up 4500. Back across. Now when you come back to, you should be able to get an alignment path up to where you started. So when you get that blue dashed line, just click and hit the escape key a couple of times. Okay. My sketch line over here is not too straight, so I'll just try and straighten that one up. It's better. So I'm going to now use the trim extender corner, this tool up here, just to tidy up my sketch lines. So selecting this sketch line here, and this one here, and these two here, again to form a in this case sort of a backward L as a closed loop. Okay, once you've done that, you can click finish, and that will generate the road itself. Now, if you were to have a look at a 3D view, and I'll just take off the shading for the moment, you can see the result. So, and I guess the thing is that sorry, I'm having trouble here. The pad itself, you can see the pad itself is actually cutting into the terrain in places. In other places, it's actually sitting above the terrain. See, I don't know if you can sort of get a sense of that. If I was to hide the roadway, just do a HH on that, you can see that, see how it's actually flattened out the terrain underneath. And what I think we'll do is we'll actually perhaps just maybe lift, if you can appreciate, when you've placed the driveway and the roadway, what you can do afterwards is you can actually nominate at which level the pad is produced. See how it's actually being produced at the site level, which is 150 below floor level. If you want to actually lift the pad up, what you can do is actually just alter the height offset from level here. So if you want to lift it up slightly, you could actually put in maybe 100, and that pulls the pad up higher. So there's not as much of a step down from the pad at the back here. And in fact, you could actually select the pad at the back and then make that 100 as a site offset, and then both two are then level. And if you're going to lift the driveway here, it would make sense to actually lift the roadway well. So that becomes 100, 100 above the current level, which is site. Okay. Now, the obvious, I guess, what's the obvious issue here? No, in some places it actually cuts through the topography, which is good, but other places it's actually lifted above, so it looks a bit unnatural. So I'm going to show you now a technique where you can actually adjust the topography to match or actually come up and meet the road and the pathing, for instance. And to do that, we actually work in the site view. So just return to the site view. And if you then select the topography, because that's what we're going to modify, and if you have to make a modification to a topography that you've created, you then click Edit Surface. And it comes back to the, I guess, these survey points, or these points that we used to create it in the first place. So we went through this at the end of last week's session. In creating a topography, you have to actually add points at certain levels, certain heights. Now, along the roadway, for instance, what you can do is you can actually add new points. And you can actually add points to the corner of the roadway, for instance, and along the length of the roadway. And I guess the aim here is to add points for the purpose of actually picking the terrain up so it sort of meets the roadway, or is just drops just below the surface of the road. So where it's lower, it actually sort of does this curve up to the roadway itself. And I guess you know you'd have to work out, I guess, the relationship between the topography and the pad or the roadway itself, work out your heights and so forth. So it just takes a bit of experimentation. But at the moment, the elevation for these new points is 0. Now I think the topography is produced at floor level from memory. So if you actually want to, set the topography down, you actually have to sort of specify minus values. But I mean, if we have a look at, just cancel that for the moment. If you click on some of these existing points, you'll see that this one is actually minus 609. This one is minus 457. In here you've got 0. Over here you've got 0 as well. So in adding the points, I've determined that in this situation, if we actually put in a value of, say, minus 100, that will set the terrain just below the surface of the road. And what we do is we set the elevation to minus 100, and then we proceed to actually add a series of points along the road, like so. And as you do it, you can see the contour lines changing, and then we sort of just move across like this. And we'll just come over here and do this on this side, and then one on this side as well. Okay, so Does that make sense? So we're actually sort of putting specific points along the edge of the road in both directions, and those points are at -100. So a series of new points. Now you can, if you zoom right in, you can also, and I would suggest doing it, you can also just maybe add some points just around or just at the corners initially of the driveway, and then maybe just put some interim points along the edge of the driveway and the pathing, like so. One up here perhaps, and then one in here. So essentially what we're doing is we're actually sort of lifting up the terrain at the edge of the driveway and the road, so that it actually sort of sweeps up and just sits just below the surface. Now, once you've done that, just click the green tick and finish the terrain edit. Now, if we go to a 3D view, have a look at the difference it makes. So this area through here, see how that's it's now just sitting just below the edge of the road and also the pad here for our driveway. So it's tidied up that area there, and also along here, along this edge along here. So you can see how nice the terrain is now lifted up and is now meeting the side of the pad itself. Yes, question?
I'm just drawing a triangle from one corner to the other, and it looks like it's like that whole region.
Yeah, just I guess if you've getting a result that you didn't expect, it might be advisable just to go back and just re-edit the surface, and I guess just have a look at where you put your points. You might have inadvertently put a point out somewhere out here, perhaps, or but just check your points in this exercise. I mean, I basically put a point here, one here, and a series of points along the edge of the road, in the corner here, and then just up the edge, side of the road up here, and across and back. Yeah, I wouldn't be, don't be too concerned if it's not exactly or not perfect for this exercise. I guess it's more about the process or the technique. And I guess, to be honest with you, I mean, I only discovered this myself a week ago, because I was thinking, okay, well, there must be some way of actually manipulating the terrain to suit the pad itself. And it just made sense to actually sort of trace the pad edges with additional data, with additional points at certain height elevations, and that would actually sort of make the terrain sort of just curve up and meet the edge of the pad itself. So, and basically that means that rather than using subregions, we can use pads which are completely flat and look far more realistic. So we'll finish that one. So that's the terrain now. I'm happy with the terrain. I've put my pads in place. I'm happy with the terrain. And I guess what we are going to do next is think about putting in trees, a car, and people. Okay, and we could then start looking at putting in things like railings, fencings, and so forth. I just want to show you something quickly, which is quite nice, and I don't expect you to follow me with this one, but in this pad over here, and what I'll do is I'll actually change this one now to driveway and path so it matches the front one. Now the owner wants to put in a swimming pool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to building pad. I'm going to edit type, and I'm going to create a new pad called pool. As in swimming pool. And I'm going to make it a metre deep. And I'm going to add a material of water. Okay, assigning a material called water. Change its render appearance and click OK. And OK. So again, another brand new pad type. So I've now got the driveway, the roadway, and one called pool. Now, what I can do, and I'll just escape from that. So I'll just click pad again just to make sure that one is there. Oh no, it's lost it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'll come back to that. If you don't actually create the object, the actual pad with the new type, it doesn't hold that setting. So what I'll do is I'll do this step first, which is I'm actually going to make a modification to the existing pad. Edit the boundary. I'll just get rid of these dimensions here. So if you draw a sketch inside the original boundary like this, as a rectangle, for instance, what it does is it obviously makes a hole or a penetration in it. Now, if I then go to building pad, and I'll just go through that process again, so duplicate, pool, meter, I'll assign a material called water, and if I then draw this new pad as a rectangle inside this one, the one that I've cut out, and I'll just switch to a 3D view. So that's the pad that I've cut. That's the pad I've created as a pool. So if I lift that one up by 50. And if I do a quick ray trace on that, I've got a swimming pool. So what I'm trying to, I guess, get across is that, with Revit, with software, you've got to think outside the square. Okay, so you think, okay, well, I want to put a pool in. How do I make a pool? How do I find a pool? Well, how simple is that? And the beauty of the pad object is that it cuts the terrain. So the swimming pool itself gives the illusion of depth because it's cutting through the terrain itself. and the water material, I mean, it looks a lot better on screen here, but that's pretty good. If you're doing a high-res render, that's going to look pretty good, okay? So just a technique where you can actually quickly create something like a swimming pool just with a pad itself. So just giving you some ideas here, okay? So these are the sort of things that I'd like you, or you'll need to do in the assessment task, is that you're going to have to develop the site. So obviously manipulate the terrain, add a driveway and pathing, a roadway perhaps, and things like features like pools and other landscaping features. And of course, as I said, trees, people and a car, which we're going to have a look at next. So I'll just come back to the site view. By the way, when you have assigned materials and you're wanting to check the results of your materials, the process or the technique I just used here was one called ray trace, which is the bottom option here on visual styles. Now that will give you, I guess, very quickly a very accurate sort of indication of what those materials are going to look like with a bit of lighting. In this case, natural light. Rather than doing realistic, because if I click realistic, that's what it looks like, okay? But ray tracing, doing a quick ray trace there, and that's different to the actual ray tracing process, but it gives you a more realistic view, idea of the materials in use. So if you use this particular technique to actually stop it and close it, you actually have to click stop or just click close. So that takes you back to your normal visual style. So what I'm going to do next is just go back to the site view, and what you can do now that you've added your driveway and your roadway, can you just switch off the temporary hide isolate. So the shortcut there is HR. And what I'd like you to do next is just place some trees and shrubs around the building itself. Now, just bear in mind that for this exercise, I'm going to set up a camera out here. So the camera is going to sit out here and look at the building this way. And I'm going to set up a second camera out here that's going to look at the building from this direction. So, and the thing is that when you're adding trees around the building, don't put them right in front of the camera, okay? Or think about where you're going to put the camera, and then I guess if you put trees in and they're in front of the camera and all you're seeing is a tree, then move it, all right? Because with your renders, I don't want to see trees, I want to see your building, okay? So, and the thing is that when you are adding things like trees, cars and people, the trees themselves or those objects become or are things called site components. See this button up here? So we're predominantly working on the Massing and Site tab, and to actually place site-related objects, we place them as a site component. Now, in the type selector, in this particular file, you've got some trees here, deciduous trees. So there's a number of different types. I guess their height is in feet, which given that it's a US file. Now, the thing is that this RPC tree family, where did it come from? If you wanted to load in a tree family, where would you go? Yeah, well, you'd go up to load family. And what I suggest you do, perhaps, is to give you a broader range of trees, for instance. Go out to the families that Revit provides and scroll down to, and things like trees and shrubs you'll find in the planting folder. And you'll see here there are 3D trees, and there are trees and plants that have the letters RPC in front of them. Okay, now RPC, and I'll talk about this later, RPC stands for Rich Photorealistic Content. Please do not use the top two there, 3D trees, because they are just stick figure representations of trees. And I emphasise that because students have used them in the past. Okay, and that's a big no. The RPC, anything with the letters RPC in front of it is going to look realistic, guaranteed. So please use the RPC families, in this case the trees. So if you're wanting to use any of these other families, then select them by all means and load them in. Okay, so that just gives you additional families to scroll through and choose trees and shrubs, for instance. Now, when you now I'll just clear that for the moment. Now, when you click Site Component again, where do you find things like cars and people? Well, again, you can go out to the Revit libraries, and what I suggest you do for this exercise and for the assessment task, because you will be required to put in people and cars or a car, go out to the Revit library and just go back to the main folders. Now again, to get back to the main folders, over here, there's a link here called Metric Library. Okay, I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you have actually gone into a folder and you're not sure how to get back, click on this button here, which is Metric Library, and that takes you back to all the folders. And then go down to this one here, which is Entourage. Okay, so for people and cars and a few other things, Entourage. If you're searching the net for this this sort of content, that's what you'd put in as a search. You know, Revit Entourage or Revit Content. Here you've got vehicles, boats. You've got some RPC families here. Please, I would suggest that you don't use any of the vehicles in here. They are terrible. Okay. Boats, yeah, I would say that they're the same as well. Again, just go for the RPC families. So the only car that you really have available is the Beetle as an RPC. So for the exercise, we'll use that one. And I guess if it's the only one available to you, you can use it for the assessment task as well. As hard as I've tried, I cannot find any other RPC vehicles out on the web. Only because they are I guess a commercial thing. There is a company that produces these RPC objects, but you have to pay for them. So nothing's free. If anyone does find any, let me know. Question?
Is that the same for plantings? If you say you have to do like a landscape plan with some RPC plants, do you have to use the ones that are in Revit, or can you find them?
No, if you so the question is if you want additional trees, say if you want native trees,
yeah, high quality ones.
high quality native trees, for instance, as RPC. Yes, go off on out on the web and do a search for them. You may find them. You're more likely to find trees than you are cars. But it's possible that there is maybe an RPC family out there for Australian natives, which would be good. I'm not saying there is, but if you find one, let me know. Same with the cars. I'm sick of this beetle. I'd like something different as well. But this is the only choice we have. This is what Revit provides us with as free content. But if you can find something else, well and good. So select RPC beetle. Now, as far as people are concerned, you've got RPC female and RPC male. So I would suggest that you actually load in those three families as a minimum, in addition to the planting families if you want a greater variety of trees and shrubs. So highlight those and then open, just load them in. So we're just loading them in to get them ready, basically. So as I say, I would suggest now that I'll just give you a bit of time now to actually, and I think what we'll do perhaps is we'll leave the trees, do the trees afterwards. But what we can do initially is we can actually place the car. So put the car in the driveway, and then maybe just add some people around the building itself. So again, go up to Site Component. In the Type selector now, you've got RPC male and RPC female. So you've got a number of choices there of people. You've got the car, the beetle. So we'll choose that one. When it comes out, like most things, if you actually hit the space bar, it will rotate. Now, notice the patterning that I've got on my driveway here. If I actually highlight one of the diagonal lines here and hit space bar, the car actually aligns to that. So if you've got something on the diagonal there. Otherwise, it just rotates to vertical, horizontal. Okay, so yes, question.
What's the difference between placing the architectural component to a site component? Does it behave differently?
Yeah, so the question is, what is the difference between a site component and an architectural component? And the answer is nothing. Yeah, so, well, when I say nothing, you can still place, I've still placed that car using the component, and I can still place my people and trees. It's just that when you click component, architectural component, it lumps them all together. So everything that is deemed a component in the project is listed here, okay, including, you know, desks and kitchens and everything else. If you do it from site component, it just limits the search, what's available here in the type selector. So I guess, you know, if you're working with the site tools, it just makes sense to sort of, you know, do it from the site component, but no difference really. Okay, so yeah, so if you can just just place a few, maybe one or two people around your building. So again, with your people, when you bring them out, so I've got a person there that's attached to my crosshair. Now I guess the pointy bit of the RPC person is the way they're looking. That's the front of the person. And if you hit your space bar, that will rotate. And again, if you can highlight a diagonal like that and hit the space bar, it rotates to align with the diagonal. Now, I guess the thing is that you've also got to consider when you're placing these objects, the same with trees and plants, also consider that when you place them, they may not be actually attached to the surface of the pad. So you've got to, I guess, after you've placed it, just select it and have a look at the offset here. So you'll have to perhaps look at the level that you've placed it on. So remember the pad itself, I think we actually lifted 100 mil from the site level. So the person, if they're sitting at 0, quite likely their feet are buried in the concrete or the driveway, so they're probably sitting too low. So just bear that in mind. The same with the car itself. So just have a look at that one. Found a car. Oh, good. Is it RPC?
Yeah.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I've got a student here that's found some RPC cars, so that's I'm excited. No, that's good. All right. Anything? So there's quite a few there. Yeah. Oh, good.
Make it a free account, and then you can.
Okay. So yeah. So I'll get that website off. I'll find that website and we'll share that on the site. So that's good. So yeah. So anything but this beetle. So just make sure that when you place your site components that they are sitting on the surface, they're not floating or they're not buried. So we'll just place a couple more people here. So again, massing and site components. And what I'll get you to do is, once you've placed your people and your car, can you just add some trees and shrubs around the building itself? And I'll just give you a few minutes to do that as well. Okay, so we've put some trees and shrubs around. Now there's just something else I'd like to just show you quickly. Because one of the other things I'd like you to do is add some fencing, and maybe just sort of maybe find some sort of a decorative or different type of fencing that you could use for the front of the property, and perhaps another type of fencing that you can put around the property on both sides and the back, just to enclose the property itself. Because what fencing tends to do is it sort of it also acts as a mask, so that you can actually sort of contain the view itself, and you're not seeing endless expanses of nothing. So fencing just tends to sort of frame the actual building itself in a perspective view. Now the thing is with fencing, I guess it's a matter of actually finding Revit fencing that you can use, and if I do find a file that contains different fencing types, I'll actually make it available to students. But with fencing, for instance, I guess there's a couple of things you can use for fencing, and one of them is railing. So back to the architecture tab. So you can actually use railing for, I guess, for things like fencing around pools, for instance, or the lower fencing, or technically, I guess they are known as a fence or a rail. Another tool that you can use to create a fence type, which you may not have thought about, is the curtain wall. So a curtain wall can be adapted to reproduce a fence, for instance. So a curtain wall essentially is a series of mullions and panels. And fences, your common good neighbour fence is frame and panel. So just sort of throwing that out there and giving you some ideas on how you could produce, fences potentially, maybe using the curtain wall tool or as railings. Now, with railings, it may be a while since you've used railings or look at railings. You may never have used railings, but essentially, I guess railings are also added to the sides of stairs. So if you've worked with stairs, you've obviously worked with railings. Now, with your railing, essentially what you do is you can place it on a stair ramp, or you can sketch to place a rail. And I guess over in the current exercise, over here in the type selector, you've got 3 or 4 railing types here. If I wanted to put a fence around the pool, for instance, I could perhaps use this glass panel bottom fill. As a type, and essentially, as I say, to place the railings, you use one of these draw tools to sketch the path. So for instance, if I use the pick option, maybe set the offset here to 500, and then begin sketching a path for my railing. So I'll use the pick option again, and I'll just change that back to 100, for instance, and then just maybe place a railing on the edge of the pad here, like so. And maybe just take it up here and across to here. Whoops. Take that back to about here. And again, when you're actually sketching a path for a railing, all of the segments have to be connected. They don't have to be a closed loop, but they do have to be connected. So I'll just take that through to there, and I'll draw another line from here down to the building itself, if I can get there. And use my trim extender corner just to connect those two there. So having drawn my sketch path, I can then finish and generate that railing type. So if I have a look at that in 3D, there's my railing. Now, at any point, if I want to change that, of course, if I don't like the look of that railing, I can then select it and then change it to a different type up here. And again, with the railing itself, just be mindful of the fact that, see how that's actually sort of, the bottom of the railing is actually sort of buried in the pad itself. So I'm going to have to lift that one up. So here, the base offset, that's going to be 100 plus, or plus 100, to match the pad itself. Okay. So again, with things like that, just make sure that the object is the correct height and sits on the pad surface. So you can see that if I do a quick ray trace on that now, Now, the thing is that bear in mind that what we haven't done yet is assign materials. Yes, we have assigned materials to the pad objects, but in your case, or in my case, yes, I have assigned materials, but in your case, you haven't assigned materials to the building and the terrain, so it's just going to look basically grey at the moment. So essentially, once we've finished developing the site, that's the next task, the next thing to do on our list. So what I'll get you to do is next is to think about assigning materials to the building. Things like the railing, the topography itself. Yes, you've done the pad here and the roadway, so that's done. So what I'd like you to spend now just a little while to just to assign some materials to the walls, the roof, the gutters, the fascia, the doors and door frames, and so forth. And then once we've done that, we'll then sort of have a look at setting up a couple of perspective views and just doing some quick ray traces to sort of check the results. All right, so I'll let you just work away at that. So just materials next. And I guess the thing is that where possible, assign materials by type. Okay, where possible, assign materials by type. The face materials assigning materials by face, I guess, is just leave that as an option if need be, but don't go directly to the face option in assigning materials. Do it by type where you can, please. Okay, so yeah, just I wanted to just spend a bit of time and just talk about how we actually assign materials to things like railings and also the stair itself. Now, let's have a look at railings. So the railing that's assigned to the staircase is this one here, which is the 1100 millimetre, which is also the same railing that I've used here. Okay, so same railing type. Now railings, I guess going back to probably maybe the first or second session when I was talking about how we assign materials, does anyone recall the three methods of assignment for materials? So face, type, and what was the third one? Category. Good, thank you. Category. So the railings themselves are quite complex as a what we call a system or a system family. When you actually select the railing itself and you go into its type properties, you've got here you've got rail structure, non-continuous, and you've got baluster placement. And if you go into each of these dialogues, there's nowhere really that you can actually assign a material. And I guess the thing is, down through here, there's also no way of assigning material just directly through its type properties. And I guess the thing is that to do this correctly, you actually have to go down to a component level of the railing itself, because the railing is made up of balusters and a top rail primarily, and each of those subcomponents is a family in its own right. So you actually have to go down to it like a subcomponent level. Now, rather than sort of overcomplicating it at this stage, it's probably easier in this situation to actually assign a material to the railing through the category option. Okay, now, and if you assign a material to a category, the material then is assigned to every type within that category. So it doesn't matter what railing type we use in our model. If we do it by category, it's all going to be the same. And I guess if you are going to use the same railing type in your model, then it's not going to be a problem really. And the way that we assign by category, does anyone know how we do that? Sorry? No. So if you're going to assign materials by category, no, it's actually here on the Manage tab, and it's here, Object Styles. So I guess the thing is, it's been a while since you probably looked at this, but if you're assigning materials by category, it's done by Object Style, or through Object Styles here. And so on the left here, you've got category. So if we scroll down to the category of railings and expand that, if you're going to assign a material, as I say, the railing itself is made up of a top rail and the vertical component, which is the baluster. So you have to go down, open up railings, and go to balusters and top rails, those two. And that's where you directly assign your material. So I'm just going to do a search here for metal and just maybe choose metal chrome. So metal chrome for that one, and OK. So that's now assigned that material for both of those railing elements. So as I say, this is the quickest, probably the quickest method to do railings. So just without really overthinking it and sort of going into it too deeply, do it by Object Styles, which is by category. So that takes care of the railing. So the thing is that if I change this railing here to a different railing type, say the glass panel bottom fill, even though it's a different type of railing, the subcomponents of that railing are still going to be metal chrome. Okay. Now, with the stairs themselves, to assign a material to a staircase, I'll just hide this category, get this out of the way. Okay, so with the staircase itself, what you do is you select the staircase and you go up here to Edit Stairs. So that just gives you the stringers at the side here. It'll give you the run and also the landings. So landings, run, and stringers. So to assign a material to the stringers, for instance, so the stringer itself, again, is a subcategory. Select one of the stringers, go into its type properties, and that's where you can assign the material to this stringer family or subfamily. Okay, so that's done. As I said, where possible, assign materials by type. Do not paint. Okay, do not paint unless you absolutely have no other choice. Because if you can appreciate that by assigning by type, I've now assigned the same material to all the other stringers as part of this stair type. Okay. Now you then move on to the run itself, and then open up its type properties, and here you can assign to the tread, assign a material to the tread and one to the riser, so you can actually, you know, have different materials for both parts of that run. Now the other thing that you can do with the run itself is if you scroll down, you can actually switch off the risers. See this area here, risers? So you can actually, if you untick risers and click apply, see how it switches off the riser and makes an open stair? Okay. Switching off the treads would be interesting, wouldn't it? Okay. Yeah. So we won't go any further with stair modification at this stage, but just looking at the materials, tread and riser. So that's taken care of that. So of course, doing it through the type properties, it will actually do the entire staircase. Deselect that. Now the landing itself, if we have a look at the type properties here, so you can see that the material for the landing, I'm pretty sure, will take on the material assigned to the run. Okay, so there's no need to do that one. Same with this here. Okay, now if I was to just change my visual style to realistic, see how the staircase now, the stair itself has taken on that timber, that cherry material. If I then finish editing the stairs, green tick, I've now got my railings with a material assigned also. So again, if I just reposition the model, if I go down to the visual style here and choose ray trace, that'll give me a better idea of the current material assignments. So you can now see the people and the car. Okay, so yes, it's still quite dark because we sort of really haven't addressed the lighting yet. And obviously the next thing that we need to do is actually set up some perspective views, have a look at the lighting, the sun position, have a look at, I guess, other things like exposure settings, and then ultimately have a look at actually ray tracing and producing ray traced images, and the ways that we do that. So if you can just say finish off your material assignment at this stage, and have that ready for next week, and then we'll just continue on and have a look at those sort of last few aspects of the process. Okay, now just quickly, I'll just stop that and do a hide reverse on that and change that back to hidden line. Just do a close hidden views, do a final save. So just as I say, just save it, hang on to it, because we will need this this particular file next week. Now, just quickly, Jacob found a site with RPC cars. Now that site is called Modeler, modeler.com. So this is a brilliant site for Revit content. Let's do a search for Revit. Yeah, okay, so you see there, if you go to the Modeler site, you do a search for Revit, it has, 1,000+ product results for Revit. There's all sorts of things you can download. So here, will Revit cars get us there? Now the Modeler site itself is free. Let's go back to Revit. It is free, but you'll have to actually join. So it's a free membership, but you'll have to actually sign up and join to actually download. So formats Revit. Yeah, so somewhere within that site there are cars, yes? Yeah, definitely. Okay. So that's where Jacob found the RPC cars. If I can get a direct link, I'll put it up onto the Learn site, but I'm sure we'll be able to find them somewhere in that collection. I'll see more. Yeah, it's just not coming up in the list here, but they're obviously there somewhere. Yeah. Okay. Yes, as I say, I'll have a look myself before next week, and then I'll share that with you. So, okay. So if you can finish off assigning your materials, finish off your site, and we'll pick this up next week. All right. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.